Why do we know so little about Tajikistan? This question often lingers in the minds of the few travelers who venture into its heart. Here is a country cradled by some of the highest mountains on earth, the Pamirs, often called the roof of the world. It is a land of breathtaking beauty, with turquoise lakes and dramatic winding roads that cling to the sides of cliffs. Yet, for all its spectacular scenery and deep history, Tajikistan remains a blank space on the mental map of many people in the West. It is a nation with ancient Persian roots, a past shaped by mighty empires, and a more recent history scarred by Soviet control and a devastating civil war. Its story is one of resilience, a constant struggle for identity in a world that has often overlooked it. The silence surrounding Tajikistan isn't accidental. For much of the 20th century, it was a remote and tightly controlled outpost of the Soviet Union. Its borders were sealed, its culture was suppressed, and its narrative was rewritten to fit a Moscow-centric worldview. Before that, it was a pawn in the Great Game, the strategic rivalry between the British and Russian empires for control of Central Asia. This history of being defined by outsiders, of being a frontier or a buffer zone, has left a profound mark. The story of Tajikistan is not just about a place. It's about a people, the Tajiks, who have fought to keep their unique Persian culture alive against overwhelming odds, a quiet but determined struggle for recognition and a place in the modern world. Understanding this nation requires peeling back layers of history, each one revealing a different facet of its character. We must look beyond the modern headlines of a poor post-Soviet state and see the land of the Sogdians, the ancient merchants who dominated the Silk Road. We need to appreciate its connection to the great Persian empires, a bond felt in its language, poetry, and traditions. The soul of Tajikistan is not found in sterile political reports, but in the warmth of its people, in the ancient rhythms of its music, and in the enduring spirit of a culture that has weathered conquests, revolutions, and profound loss, yet still looks to the future with a stubborn, quiet hope. This essay is a journey to uncover that hidden story. It is an attempt to answer that initial question by traveling back in time, through the dust of the Silk Road, the grandeur of Islamic cities, and the gray uniformity of the Soviet era. We will walk through the pain of its civil war and witness the complex reality of its present-day existence. We will meet a nation grappling with its identity, balancing the need for stability with the desire for freedom, and navigating a complex geopolitical landscape. This is the story of Tajikistan, a land of soaring peaks and deep valleys, a nation whose voice deserves to be heard, a people whose journey is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Long before modern borders were drawn, this land was a bustling crossroads of civilization. The ancient Silk Road, that legendary network of trade routes, snaked directly through the heart of what is now Tajikistan. This was the domain of the Sogdians and the Bactrians, remarkable peoples who were the master merchants of their age. They weren't just traders of silk and spices, they were transmitters of ideas, religions, and art. The Sogdians in particular established communities all the way to China, their language becoming the lingua franca of the Silk Road. Their legacy is etched into the very stones of ancient settlements like Panjakan, often called the Pompeii of Central Asia, where archaeologists have unearthed stunning frescoes depicting heroic epics, daily life, and religious scenes. This region was never truly isolated. It was deeply connected to the great Persian empires to the west, particularly the Achaemenid and later the Sasanian empires. The people here spoke an Eastern Iranian language, a direct ancestor of modern Tajik. This shared heritage created a powerful cultural bond that has survived for millennia. The Zoroastrian faith, with its concepts of light and darkness, good and evil, flourished here long before the arrival of Islam. This Persian connection is the bedrock of Tajik identity. It separates them culturally from their Turkic-speaking neighbors in Central Asia, and gives them a unique claim to a rich literary and artistic tradition that includes epic poets like Ferdowsi and philosophical minds like Avicenna. Imagine the caravans that passed through these valleys. They carried not just goods, but also beliefs. Buddhism traveled eastwards along these paths, leaving its mark in the form of monasteries and statues, like the giant reclining Buddha discovered at Ajina Tepe. Manichaeism and Nestorian Christianity also found followers here, creating a vibrant tapestry of faith and philosophy. This was a world of incredible diversity, a melting pot where ideas from Persia, India, China, and the Hellenistic world, left behind by Alexander the Great, all mingled and merged. The mountains that now seem to isolate Tajikistan were once the very conduits that connected great civilizations and made this land a vital center of the ancient world. The echoes of these ancient times are still present today. You can feel them in the features of the people, hear them in the melodies of traditional music, and see them in the intricate patterns of local crafts. The story of Tajikistan doesn't begin with the Soviet Union or even with the arrival of the Russian Empire. It begins here in the distant past, with camel caravans kicking up dust on the Silk Road and with storytellers reciting Persian epics under the stars. This ancient soul, forged in the crucible of empires and trade, is the foundation upon which everything else has been built. It is a legacy of connection, of culture, and of a deep enduring link to the wider Persian world. The arrival of Arab armies in the 8th century brought a profound and lasting change to the region, the coming of Islam. This was not just a change of religion but the dawn of a new cultural era. The Persian-speaking peoples of the area, including the ancestors of the Tajiks, embraced the new faith but infused it with their own rich cultural heritage. This fusion gave rise to one of the most brilliant periods in world history, often called the Islamic Golden Age. Under dynasties like the Samanids, who were of Persian origin, the region became a global center for science, philosophy, art, and literature. The Samanid rulers championed the Persian language, commissioning great works and fostering a cultural renaissance. During this era, cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, though now located in modern-day Uzbekistan, were the beating heart of Tajik and Persian culture. They were magnificent centers of learning, home to sprawling libraries, observatories, and academies that attracted the greatest minds of the age. It was here that the physician Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, wrote his Canon of Medicine, a medical encyclopedia that would be used in Europe for centuries. It was here that the poet Rudaki, considered the father of Persian poetry, composed his timeless verses. This was a world illuminated by intellectual curiosity and artistic expression, where mathematics, astronomy, and poetry flourished side by side in a remarkable display of human achievement. The architectural wonders from this period stand as a testament to its glory. The grand mosques, towering minarets, and dazzling madrasas or Islamic schools, decorated with intricate tilework, were marvels of engineering and artistry. These buildings were not just places of worship or study, they were powerful symbols of a confident and sophisticated civilization. The vibrant blue domes that punctuated the skyline were meant to evoke the heavens, creating spaces that inspired awe and contemplation. For the Tajik people, these cities represent the zenith of their cultural history, a time when their language was the language of poetry, and their cities were beacons of knowledge that shone brightly across the world. Even after the Samanid dynasty fell, and waves of Turkic and Mongol invasions swept through the region, this Persian Islamic cultural identity endured. The language and the traditions it carried were resilient, surviving conquest and political upheaval. The legacy of this golden age became a core part of what it meant to be Tajik. It created a deep well of cultural pride and a historical narrative rooted in intellectual and artistic greatness. The tragedy for modern Tajikistan is that its most iconic historical centers, Bukhara and Samarkand, were placed outside its borders by Soviet mapmakers, leaving the nation culturally rich but physically separated from its most famous monuments. The slow, creeping expansion of the Russian Empire in the 19th century marked the beginning of the end for the old Central Asian order. This was the era of the so-called Great Game, a tense geopolitical struggle where Imperial Russia and Great Britain vied for influence and territory. The ancient Khanates and emirates of the region, including the Emirate of Bukhara, which controlled much of the land inhabited by Tajiks, were honestly no match for the industrial and military might of the Tsars. They were systematically conquered or turned into protectorates, their autonomy stripped away. For the Tajik people, this meant being drawn into the orbit of a new, powerful, and culturally alien empire, a world away from their Persian and Islamic roots. The true transformation, however, came after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. When the Soviets came to power, they sought to completely remake society. Central Asia was carved up into new administrative units, the Soviet Socialist republics based on nationality. This was a radical and honestly often brutal process. The borders were drawn by Stalin's commissars in Moscow, often with little regard for the complex ethnic and historical realities on the ground. In the 1920s, the Tajik Soviet Socialist Republic was created, but crucially, the ancient cultural centers of Bukhara and Samarkand, with their large Tajik-speaking populations, were assigned to the Uzbek SSR. This act was a devastating cultural blow, severing the new republic from its historical heartland. Soviet rule was a period of intense and often violent change. Traditional society was turned upside down. The authorities launched aggressive campaigns against Islam, closing mosques, persecuting religious leaders, and promoting state-sponsored atheism. The Arabic script, used for centuries to write the Tajik Persian language, was replaced first with a Latin alphabet and then with Cyrillic, cutting new generations off from their vast literary heritage. A new Soviet identity was aggressively promoted. People were taught to see themselves first as Soviet citizens, with their Tajik identity being a secondary regional flavor. History was rewritten to emphasize Russian benevolence and to erase the memory of a glorious, independent past. This systematic suppression had a profound and lasting impact. While the Soviets brought modernization in the form of infrastructure, literacy, and healthcare, it came at the cost of cultural continuity. A deep sense of loss permeated society, a feeling that something precious had been taken away. The collective memory of the Persian Golden Age and the deep roots of Islamic tradition were driven underground, surviving in families and private gatherings but erased from public life. The Red Shadow cast a long and dark presence over the mountains of Tajikistan, creating a society that was outwardly modern and Soviet, but inwardly still connected to a past that it was forbidden to celebrate. The sudden collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 was not the joyous moment of liberation it was for some other republics. For Tajikistan, it was a terrifying leap into the unknown. The country was ill-prepared for statehood. It was the poorest republic in the USSR, heavily dependent on subsidies from Moscow and lacked strong, independent institutions. Suddenly, the central power that had held its complex society together for 70 years was gone. The old certainties vanished overnight, and a dangerous power vacuum emerged. The artificial Soviet identity crumbled away, revealing deep fault lines that had been suppressed but never erased. These fault lines were not purely ethnic, but a complex mix of regional, clan-based, and ideological divisions. On one side was the old guard, the former communist elite who had run the country during the Soviet era and were determined to hold on to power. They drew their support mainly from the established regions of Khujand in the north and Kulyab in the south. On the other side was a loose coalition of democratic reformers, Islamic revivalists, and groups representing the interests of other regions, particularly Gorno-Badakhshan in the east and the Garm Valley. This opposition felt excluded and sought a more pluralistic and culturally authentic future for the nation. What followed was one of the most brutal post-Soviet conflicts. In 1992, just a year after independence, the country descended into a devastating civil war. It was a conflict that tore families and communities apart, pitting neighbor against neighbor in a spiral of horrific violence. The fighting was characterized by brutal massacres and ethnic cleansing, driven by regional loyalties. Entire villages were destroyed, and the country was plunged into chaos and despair. The war lasted for 5 long years from 1992 to 1997, leaving an estimated 100,000 people dead and displacing more than 1 million, a catastrophic toll for a small nation of around 6 million at the time. The war finally ended with a UN-brokered peace agreement in 1997, which brought the opposition into a coalition government. It was a landmark achievement, a rare example of a negotiated settlement to a post-Soviet civil war, but the scars ran deep. The conflict had shattered the country's infrastructure, wrecked its economy, and left a legacy of trauma and mistrust that still lingers today. The memory of the war became a powerful political tool, a constant reminder of the chaos that could return. The desperate desire for peace and stability, at almost any cost, would come to define Tajikistan's political landscape for decades to come. Out of the ashes of the civil war rose one dominant figure, Emomali Rahman. A former collective farm chairman from the southern region of Kulyab, he came to power in 1992, at the height of the conflict. He has remained there ever since, becoming one of the world's longest-serving presidents. For his supporters, and for many ordinary Tajiks who remember the horrors of the war, Rahman is the man who brought peace. He is credited with ending the bloodshed, disarming the warlords, and uniting a fractured nation. His official title, Founder of Peace and National Unity, Leader of the Nation, really reflects this narrative. Stability became his mantra, and the memory of the war is frequently invoked to justify his tight grip on power. This stability, however, has come at a significant price. Over the years, President Ramon has systematically consolidated his authority, gradually marginalizing and eliminating all forms of political opposition. The power-sharing agreement that ended the civil war has long since been abandoned. Opposition parties have been banned, their leaders imprisoned or forced into exile. The media is tightly controlled and freedom of expression is severely curtailed. A pervasive security apparatus monitors society, and any form of dissent is swiftly suppressed. The political system is now dominated by Ramon's family and allies, creating a regime that is authoritarian in all but name. The government has also embarked on a state-led nation-building project that revolves around a specific version of Tajik identity. This involves promoting pre-Islamic Persian figures like the Samanid ruler Ismail Samoni, while simultaneously placing strict controls on religious expression to counter perceived extremism. Men have been forced to shave their beards, and the hijab has been discouraged in public institutions. These policies are presented as necessary measures to preserve a secular state and prevent the rise of the kind of religious movements that were part of the opposition in the Civil War. Critics, however, see it as another layer of social control, an attempt to mold a national identity that serves the interests of the ruling elite. The central dilemma for Tajikistan today is this trade-off between order and freedom. Many people, especially the older generation who lived through the war, are willing to accept the lack of political freedom in exchange for peace and security. They see Ramon's long rule as a necessary evil to prevent a return to the chaos of the 1990s. But a younger generation with no memory of the war is growing increasingly restless. They yearn for more opportunities, greater freedoms, and a voice in their country's future. The president's peace has created a stable but stagnant society, and the question of what comes after Ramon looms large over the nation's future. What does it mean to be Tajik today? The answer is honestly quite complex, woven from threads of ancient Persian culture, a Soviet past, and the realities of a globalized world. The Tajik language, a dialect of Persian, remains the cornerstone of national identity. After decades of being written in Cyrillic, there is a growing movement, especially among intellectuals, to re-engage with the Perso-Arabic script, a symbolic act of reconnecting with a vast literary and historical heritage that was cut off by Soviet policy. This cultural preservation is a quiet but determined act of defiance, a way of asserting a unique identity in a region of Turkic-speaking nations. Yet for millions of Tajiks, the daily reality is not in Tajikistan itself. The country has a very weak economy, with limited job opportunities, forcing a huge portion of its male population to seek work abroad, primarily in Russia. This mass labor migration has become a fundamental feature of Tajik society. Nearly every family has a father, son, or brother working thousands of miles away, sending back remittances that are crucial for survival. This creates what is sometimes called a nation of women, children, and the elderly. The social fabric is stretched thin, as families are separated for long periods and children grow up without their fathers. This diaspora is a source of both economic survival and profound social strain. The economic challenges facing the country are immense. Tajikistan is rich in one resource: water. The government has pinned its hopes for the future on hydropower, investing heavily in massive projects like the Rogan Dam, which is set to be the tallest in the world. The dream is to become a major electricity exporter and power a domestic industrial base. However, these projects are incredibly expensive and have created a heavy reliance on foreign loans, particularly from China. China's influence is growing rapidly, not just in finance but also in infrastructure and mining. This relationship offers a path to development, but it also raises concerns about debt dependency and the loss of economic sovereignty. Amidst these challenges, a new generation is coming of age. Young Tajiks are more connected to the outside world than ever before thanks to the internet and social media. They see the opportunities and freedoms available elsewhere and aspire to a better future. They are proud of their cultural heritage, but are also eager for change, for better governance, and for a chance to build a prosperous life in their own homeland, not as migrant laborers abroad. Their dreams and aspirations represent the future of Tajikistan. The nation's long journey from the Silk Road to the Soviet Union and through the fires of civil war continues. It is an enduring quest for dignity, identity, and a secure place in the modern world.